Hey there, welcome to Comedy Album Book Club, the podcast in which we listen to an influential, loved, hated, or rarely heard comedy album and then talk about it with comedians and comedy nerds. I'm your host, Jason DeLine, an actor and comedy enthusiast. In this episode, we discuss Dennis Miller's The Off-White album, his first of 9 from 1988. We recommend listening to the album before listening to the rest of this episode. Dennis Michael Miller was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1953. Inspired by the film All the President's Men, he majored in journalism at Point Park University. But in 1979, he saw a Robin Williams HBO special that inspired him to become a comedian. He developed his style by talking about his fears at open mics. His style is laid back but critical of current events, often citing deep-cut pop culture references, and he has a strong use of specific language, which he prides himself on. His influences include Jonathan Miller, Richard Pryor, Richard Belzer, and Jay Leno. We'll talk more about what comedians we think he's also like. He's been a political commentator, sports commentator, and actor. He was a cast member of Saturday Night Live from 1985 to 1981. He hosted the Weekend Update as the news anchor, and then he hosted his own talk shows on HBO, CNBC, as well as a radio show. Miller's listed as 21st on Comedy Central's 100 Greatest Stand-Up Comedians of All Time and was ranked as the best host of Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update by Vulture. He's done 13 comedy specials, been in 11 films, 2 of which are okay, and he's 65 years old. On today's episode, I'm joined by our producer and resident comedy nerd, Matthew Ardill.
Hello.
Hi, Matt. As well as our guests, comedian Todd Van Allen.
Hello, how are you?
There's Todd. Fine. If you're asking the audience, they can't answer, so I assume you're asking me.
Set it on a postcard.
And comedian Chili Davidson. How you doing,
babe.
Chili?
Yeah, babe.
Good to see you
That's
guys.
my little Dennis Miller. Here we go.
Sure.
Cha, cha.
Yeah,
So I made a note. I tried to write down all the little nicknames or names he said. It wasn't as long a list as I
Tough
thought.
to tell the difference between an actual person and just a name he's made up.
Sometimes,
Right.
yeah. It started with Twyla,
Uh-huh.
and then we had a Mummenschanz,
Mm-hmm.
Habib,
Right.
Aunt B,
Mm-hmm.
Cha-Cha,
Right.
Gus,
Yeah.
and Haji.
Some of those
So-
are racial.
Some of those are quite
Some of
problematic.
those are a little, yep. Some of those are not today.
Right.
Mummenschanz is actually a dance troupe.
Oh,
They do,
yeah.
They do
that's right.
mime and
That's right.
dance.
That's right.
What were some of the other ones on that one? We had Aunt B,
Aunt
I
B.
think, was the aunt from
Mayberry,
Mayberry.
right?
Mayberry.
Yeah, the Andy Griffith Show.
or like any old aunt.
Oh, and
I had
Sure.
an Aunt B.
Everyone had
Sam
an Aunt
Drucker
B.
is the shopkeep from Green Acres.
Right.
Right.
I actually made a list of
I mean,
weird,
I
obscure
watched
references.
that show, but I
Nice.
couldn't. I can't tell you the
I wouldn't
character.
remember that. I remember Mr. Haney. Because how do you, Mr. Haney, he had that crazy, something like that.
Yeah.
And then there was a guy named Arnold Ziffel. I think that was the name
Arnie
of the...
Ziffel.
Yep.
Was that the name of the pig?
No.
Or did Arnold Ziffel have a pig?
The pig was named Oh no, maybe it was Arnold.
I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a pig was Arnold. It's
Yeah,
been
the
a
pig was Arnold.
long
There's some
time.
Right.
great characters in that show.
Right.
And
Never
Eva.
felt my age
Yeah.
Gabor.
more than like I'm a pretty old
So-
soul. I get a lot of references.
Uh-huh.
I know so much about the 70s and 80s and stuff like that. But good lord, like
Yeah.
every third word is like, I mean, they call Ron James the Canadian Dennis Miller because both of them are just like, how many references can I throw out at once? And if you
Right.
get the references, it doesn't even matter if you find them funny or not.
Right.
You just love it. You're
Well,
like,
and I
yeah.
think he gets less accessible as he goes. This is
Right.
Miller's
Yeah.
first album, and I got most of the stuff.
Yeah.
Some of it's very specific, a
Less
very small moment of time in like
Right.
87 or something. But before we get too deep into it,
Sure, back up.
I want to ask you, Todd,
Yes.
why you chose this album.
This was an album. First of all, I always loved Dennis Miller. He was. I know we're going to disagree on this, but like when I go back on it, yes, Norm Macdonald was a really good host of the Weekend Update.
Mhm.
But his stuff I always just found very smart, clever, well written. It was like
Yeah.
whenever I listened to it back in the 80s, I was like, that's the guy I want to be, because there's just so many great specific references. Like there's nothing I think that adds to a joke more than specificity. Like if you say I'm in a coffee shop the other day and the audience is now racing through their head going, oh, a coffee shop, so they all have their own thing.
Sure.
If you say Tim Hortons, then it's become more specific.
Right.
But there are different Tim Hortons. But if you say, I was at the Tim Hortons at Queen and Bathurst, everyone knows exactly what you
Right.
mean by Queen and Bathurst Tim Hortons.
Sure.
Like
It's
it
the
is,
worst Tim Hortons.
it's not
It
up
doesn't
there.
have a roof.
Yes,
It's a terrible.
They really just throw beans in your face.
I'm glad they finally got rid of that coffee time. There was a coffee time, was it Parliament, just south of Richmond, and the donuts always had bees on them.
Yeah,
like it was
that's
just you just couldn't go in
Yeah,
there. It was
yeah.
just the worst.
But
Anyway.
this is that
were
sort
sprinkles.
of that richness of his of
The
his specific
specificity.
choices and his just rattling that and
Yeah.
I remember reading an article about how he kind of goes through his process, and you heard examples of that today, like, you know, as he got more and more into his career. This was sort of like I'm going to put this out so people know what I'm about.
right.
In the jokes that followed this album, they became more and more, you sort of see the process he was going through, which was the first joke lands and it's for everyone. The next tag is for about 70% of the room.
Right.
And then the next tag is for like 30% of the room. And then that last one is for two guys at the back laughing their asses off because they understand the Magna Carta so well. And
Yeah.
like that's how he would structure his joke.
Interesting.
And
I feel like the whole set is like that too. Like
Yes.
it started off very accessible
Mhm.
and slow
Yeah.
paced, and then just gets really
Yeah.
fast, ranty, and referencey. Yeah.
and then he became famous for the rants.
Sure, yeah.
Which I believe started on Saturday Night Live. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't want to get off on a rant here.
I don't think so. I think it started on Dennis Miller Live.
No, but like there would be like a moment. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Where he would just go in and go. There would be a news story. He goes, I don't want to get off on a rant here. And it wasn't a long one.
Oh, yeah?
But he would just
Yeah.
throw that line out.
Yeah.
It was like
Oh.
it was the seed that it
Right.
it
I didn't
grew
know
from.
that. Okay,
Yeah.
I apologize.
What I find
Interesting.
what I find interesting about those is, like, I don't know if you ever got the books of the rants.
No.
They were transcribed. And when
Word for word?
when I say transcribed, you'd be reading it along, and he's like, all I'm saying here is thank you. All I'm saying here is, like, there is no proofreading on
Oh
this.
wow! So
It
even
is
the
just-
applause breaks.
Right.
He's,
It is just
wow.
like some guy getting $5 an hour. Type what you hear.
I'll take it.
That's a book.
I think that's kind of cool,
Yeah.
actually.
By the
You
way,
don't see that often.
Just like we do disagree on a bit of it, but you're very like I feel like you're amongst the population of the group of people wanting to do comedy in the 80s. Like, he was cool,
Right.
he was hip, he was smart, and unlike a guy like Norm Macdonald,
Right.
in terms of actually in the room, if you watch any of Dennis Miller's like Weekend Update stuff, he killed hardest in the room.
Yes.
And
Right.
people loved Dennis Miller. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Norm was for a more specific group of people, and as was Colin Quinn and
Yeah.
a lot of these people, whereas Dennis, like, killed there. He
Yeah.
was one of the only people that survived the 86-87 season because he was
Mm-hmm.
one of the only consistents, and he is very smart, and he was very cool.
And
Right.
the interesting thing too, like I find about his career is, like, he was on Star Search, lost to Sinbad, and then
Yeah.
and then
Hard to imagine.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so he's just doing the
Complete
touring
opposites.
circuit, not doing political stuff at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then Lauren sees him, and he's like, "Oh, do you want to come to New York and work for me?" And he's like,
Yeah.
it kind of like
Such
gives
a
him
weird
a
thing.
sideways job offer,
Yeah.
and his political comedy career is born.
That
at
happens with a
moment.
lot of the update guys. It's like Seth Meyers wasn't a political guy; he was an improv guy.
Yeah.
Right.
And then he was the only job he could do on Saturday Night Live, and then
Yeah.
they become these politics guys because it's like you're a great stand-up, and they need you to do something on the show.
And
A
that's
lot of these
what
stand-ups
made
can't do
Chevy
anything
Chase
else.
such a great senator.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, he clearly learned a lot from his tenure at the
Uh-huh.
desk.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Yeah.
And now he's just a brilliant
Right.
politician.
Uh-huh.
I think Jane Curtin would make a great congresswoman.
I
actually.
always have to say that if
Yeah.
Jane Curtin was doing it in the last 5 years, she'd be like a Samantha Bee type.
Oh hell yeah!
Of how
Oh, yeah.
really
Yeah.
quick she
Well,
was.
she was. Did you see her on the 40th anniversary? She came back
Yeah,
and did
she was
that was
so
pretty
funny.
rad, man.
Yeah,
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 she-
she
and super
killed it.
nice, but yeah, really,
Yeah.
really sharp.
Yeah, she's so smart.
Great
Like,
counterbalance to Aykroyd in the early
I-
days.
I
I
Like,
felt
just
she
so
was
strong.
really ahead of her time.
I think we're all missing Victoria Jackson's
Oh.
brilliance.
Sure,
I
yeah.
think
Yeah.
doing the splits on the news
Uh-huh.
desk.
That's
and-
right.
Well,
yeah.
she and Dennis Dennis Miller had a great rapport. The two
They
of
They
them.
did,
And,
actually,
it's,
yeah.
and now that we see them, we go, of course you did.
It all makes sense.
Of course you did. now.
Exactly.
So hasn't she been like completely banned from YouTube for being so freaking
Well,
crazy?
she wasn't really invited to the 40th, but Dennis Miller was. He just couldn't make it.
Yeah,
Right.
apparently
The whole
everyone
controversy.
was.
Yeah.
And there've been different accounts. Like if you ask Lauren, apparently Lauren's a pretty good guy and respects everyone who's ever been on
Yeah.
the show, despite differences they might have later. But yeah, there's stories that Dennis wasn't invited.
Well,
that
he came
couldn't
out
go.
and said,
right.
I had a vacation planned or whatever. And
Right.
I mean, I love Lauren, but I just couldn't make it. Wow.
Yeah.
Victoria was, I think she said she was invited but wasn't allowed in the room. There was a whole thing. And she's like, I don't know. if it was."
parking.
She's the only thing I've heard. She did the Carson podcast. She was really good on that, but she
Right.
feels so left out of so many things. And
What, the Carson podcast?
yeah, it's another
What?
great podcast. Not
Oh,
like a podcast,
okay,
on
all
a
right.
podcast, but
No
it's a
problem.
guy who interviews people who are famous for going on Carson or
Okay.
family members.
Oh,
of-
wow.
I thought it
Oh.
was. I thought you were confusing the Tonight Show with a podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
Everything's a podcast.
that
to these kids.
podcast?
I was like, oh,
it's the
chili.
word for it now.
I know. It's just
That
yeah.
podcast that Johnny Carson
I
hosted.
gotta go watch The Walking Dead. You know that podcast that's so great. Yeah. It's on after the Mad Men podcast. Yeah.
I just don't know television anymore.
I've got a couple other tidbits here about him that I find interesting because people often ask what happened to Dennis Miller because a lot of people champion him as this liberal comedian, this left-wing comedian, and then after
word to use.
2000,
Right.
yeah, and then after
In listening to it now, it's a little.
Sure. Oh
right.
yeah,
It's
no,
not
yeah.
right wing. It's more central.
no, and he said he voted for Herbert Walker Bush in '88, which he then later said that's proof he's conservative, and that he said that in '92.
Right.
But he's spoken over the years about kind of going left and right. He says that he follows whoever makes sense, but I think after 9/11, he's a little right of center, and you can hear the criticism here of saying something like the thing about Lebanon is the 11 million people ruined it for the rest or whatever.
Yeah.
Like that's a pretty nasty.
Yeah,
Right.
it wouldn't be as nasty then
Right.
at the time.
I would hate to be his
Yeah.
next shawarma. That is not gonna fly.
There's a lot of theories out there
Yeah,
of
well,
why he went where he did.
I think he became very scared very quickly.
Right.
Yeah.
And I
9/11.
think he clinged into the only sort of ideology. Like you can hear it in sort of even in this album. You can hear the patriotism that is in it.
Sure.
Like he makes fun of a lot of things. And
Yeah.
the people that the guy that he supports is supported by a bunch of the people he shits on in this album.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now he is part of their team.
Right.
I would love to know how he reconciles that, but it would be nice to see him as like a guest speaker at a MAGA rally, and then someone just plays Alabama.
But he's not the type of Republican that I don't think was ever a Trump supporter. He's not a Tea Party guy. He's like a John Kasich, like Tim Allen type guy who likes to act like they are really smart.
Right.
And in reality, there's no depth to a lot of the things.
Right.
they
No.
say.
And Miller says that himself, is he's not really that kind of a political guy.
Yeah.
He just wanted to make jokes. And coming from a journalism background, he liked language, he liked the specificity, and he just watched a lot of TV as a kid, so has all these arcane pop
Yeah.
culture
Yeah.
references.
Yeah.
But it sounds very clever. He's very well spoken. But he's sort of that asshole comedian, isn't he? Like he's a lot like Leary or Hicks, but with more
Right.
polish, more cool.
Yeah,
You know?
it's
Yeah.
you can see the pattern of the jokes, which is introduce what I'm about to talk about, initially shit on what I'm about to talk about, continue on with my thread, shit on that part,
Right.
then tag.
Yeah.
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 And it's just like you're right. It's like reference. Like he is grabbing the shirt and just giving you chin music
And like
the
someone,
entire time.
I read someone describe him as he wasn't particularly intelligent, but he had a deep well and a quick retrieval system.
Right.
He just has all these things he can pull from, and I'd love to know his process. That's something that comes up sometimes in this podcast. Is I
Yeah.
wish we could be a fly on the wall and understand how they write, because it seems very off the cuff. I mean, this album is only 2 tracks.
Right.
And I just assume it's probably from 2 different nights, and they just cut it in there to do that. But like that's a long you know, 40 minutes or 20 minutes, that's a long set. I mean, of
Right.
course, people do an hour and stuff like that, but I mean, there aren't a lot of real discernible segues.
Yeah.
I mean, there definitely are. You can write down what all the bits are and stuff, but it's pretty seamless.
This is actually the audio track from a video special.
Right.
Just him live in DC, I believe.
So what happens in the middle then?
I think you're right. I think it is just a splice like between a couple of nights. So
Right.
he's wearing the same suit.
Because
He
you
just
don't
goes
notice
and
a
does
cut in the
Right.
audio.
Well, it fades out. And
Yeah,
then
it does
then
fade
it
in,
goes
but
back
it's
in.
like, but
Yeah.
it picks up
Back in.
like
Yeah.
it
But
doesn't
his-
feel like it's a juxtaposition of
Yeah.
two completely different
Like
nights.
I wonder if he has like a box of similes.
Yeah, right.
And then he just like, okay, I've got this, and he just starts flipping through this Rolodex of fun,
Right.
and then finds the right one. Like the thing that has always impressed me with him is just as soon as he throws out the simile or the metaphor that he's going to anchor that joke in, you just go, of course.
Mhm.
And I also found this with The Simpsons. There were jokes in that when I first heard it in 1988 that it was like watching The Simpsons, where The Simpsons would do something and it was entertaining, but it was referring to something that you maybe didn't know. So
Yes.
then when you finally see that thing, you go, "Oh my God,
Yes.
that's that."
Yes.
right.
I've known people where I've quoted like The Godfather or something,
Right, yeah.
and they say, "Oh, Simpsons," and I'm like,
Yeah.
no.
Indirectly.
But what's fantastic about that, The Simpsons, or in the early days, was that those references, it didn't matter if you, I mean, it's icing on the cake if you
Right.
get the reference, but if you don't, it's still funny. Their jokes were good enough on
Yes.
their own. You didn't even have to get it.
No,
But that's
no,
pretty awesome.
Exactly.
And he's got
Whereas
some of
I
that.
don't always think that's the case with Dennis.
Not
Miller.
always.
No.
Some of them I'm just
No.
sitting there going, boy, I wish I got this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably was hilarious.
I was
Yeah.
watching the back of your head trying to figure out what you were getting and what you weren't
yeah.
as you were listening
My
to
favorite
this.
joke in the whole thing, I think, is the whole airplane joke, like crashing and being the only one who's not like Christian or whatever.
yeah.
That was,
Yeah.
I think that's just
Yeah, he-
brilliant written. There's not a lot of references in there. It's tight. It's just a good joke, right? There's a
Right.
few of those
Yeah.
in there that it's like, oh, that's just a really good joke, and
Yeah.
there's no need. He's not making any extra noises. He's not making any
Yeah.
extra sounds. He's not
Right.
making weird references. And he's got a couple in there. I mean, it does prove that he's just genuinely also really good at writing jokes, but he also
Yeah.
does these things. I mean, it's like Chappelle has his fishbowl of punchlines.
Right.
He's got this Rolodex of similes, as Todd says, and it's like
But he
Yeah.
doesn't
he
reuse
just
them, which
backs
is
up.
amazing.
No.
It's
Like,
Yeah.
pretty incredible.
like it
Except
fit-
for the Gabor sisters, he really leaned into them.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Well,
they
they
mentioned
do it
it
anyway.
once in this.
There's 3 times he brought the Gabor
mentioned
system
3
up.
times? He
Yeah,
did?
the only thing he brought up more than once.
Oh,
So like,
I didn't catch 3 times.
yeah,
Evangelical
Interesting.
Gabor sister.
Yes.
Doesn't he drop a Zsa Zsa in there?
yeah.
That's a Zsa Zsa.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And
And there's another. I can't.
I think he mentions Green Acres.
he does mention Green Acres, which
Well, he
is,
mentions
but-
the character.
the
Right.
characters,
Sam.
but
Yeah, yeah.
he does
Right.
specifically
Drucker.
call out the
Right.
Gabor
Right,
sisters
right,
3
yeah.
times, and I'm like, it's just
See,
the
now I gotta
only time
re-listen
I've
to it.
like the.
Huh.
That being said, the only thing he reused, and every other thing is like one and done.
Right.
See, and I
Right.
wonder if to amuse himself, when he tours or something,
Mm-hmm.
if some of the tags he comes up with on the spot,
Right.
or if it's written that heavily and tightly. I don't know.
I gotta say, the rooms that he's probably performing in front of now, he is really gonna have to dumb down some of those references.
Yeah. Well, like,
Yeah.
I wrote some of the, like B.F. Skinner, Kabuki Theater,
Uh-huh.
Momonshas, like that 70s mask stuff. Truffaut's 400 Blows.
Mhm. That was that was a good joke.
Copernicus, William the Conqueror,
Who that
Yeah.
Copernicus joke
Jeté,
you
which is
could
a
not-
dance move,
Uh-huh.
Scarullo.
But then he
And
also
Papillon,
is
like
doing
French- yeah.
jokes about wearing 2 condoms
Right.
or
Yeah, like-
square dances. Like, yeah, I was
Right.
surprised. I
2
expected
condoms,
a
that's
lot
good.
more of it to be political.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of
He
just
doesn't
kind of
even really
everyday
get into
stand-up.
politics
No.
until like 3/4
Right.
of the way
No,
through.
it's a lot
And then
of
it's-
observational.
And then it's rattle, 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 rattle.
yeah.
Yeah.
And but that I think is a testament to like him, like you say, like when this show is ramping up and he is getting more and more furious, not angry, but like furious in terms of the speed and the tone.
Right.
You can see these parts, but he also has these wonderful moments of pace because like it
Yes.
starts out very slow. Like I think it told him, I don't know, 2.5 minutes to tell his first joke.
Yeah.
Before and that's a long way to go
Yeah.
for fame.
Yeah.
Especially
Yeah.
that Coco. I think he just likes that one for Coco.
But
Yeah.
he's also hot off the introduction, right? Like
For
you
sure.
have a bit of time if you're a known commodity in the comedy world where you can just bask in the glow for a bit, and everyone's already laughing just because you're standing
Right.
there.
minutes.
Yeah,
Right.
you have a little time.
Yeah, but then he would run in to like even when he's discussing when he gets into the sex chunk,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a very fast ramp up. I can't remember the materials before. There was a fast ramp up, and then he's like, now we have this thing. You can feel the room slow down.
Right.
And then and then it speeds up again when the woman is playing is this put Gland Chop back in the car.
Yeah.
Right. Gland Chop is probably my
Oh
favorite
my
reference
gosh.
that he makes. Did you get that one, Chili? Okay, so Lamb Chop was a puppet.
Oh, right. I know
Right.
Lamb
And so
Chop.
Gland Chop is just a play on words of that one.
And it's
okay,
weird
okay,
that he
okay.
made it
Yeah.
carport because it's kind of
Right.
incongruous, the two
Yeah,
things.
exactly.
But sure, whatever.
Back in the
He
car.
gets
There's
away with that.
sometimes I do feel like it's kind of show offy. which
It is.
pulls
Yes.
Me back.
Yes.
Like, what is the word he used? I use now I'm pretty respectful about sex, but I guess in my younger days I used to be,
Precocious.
Capricious.
Oh, capricious.
Right.
Yeah.
which is like that's me being that's
Yeah.
like just like that's you could say
Right.
loose, and we'd all
Right.
get
Sure.
loose.
Yeah.
But that's part of his whole thing,
It's
right?
fa-
Like
fancy words, yeah.
He somehow was. I think he was in a very specific time where he became famous on Saturday Night Live, where we were okay with people sort of being smarter than us, and
Yeah.
nobody allows that anymore.
Right.
Everybody wants comedians to be equal or dumber than us now.
Right.
But it used to be like we'd respect someone who was in a slightly authoritative position. He wore a suit. He was the newsman, but he was sarcastic. He talked out of the side of his mouth, and people liked. And sometimes he punched down,
Yeah.
like, and people at the time, I feel like enjoyed picking on other people
But that
in
was
a
the
different
80s.
way.
Like, I have described
yeah.
I have described 80s comedy as welcome to the 80s, where racism is totally cool and queers are weird, and that was it. Like,
And it's how
Yeah.
fast and quick can I be?
right.
Yeah.
You look at a
Yeah.
lot of like
Yeah.
Rich Scheidner is a perfect example of a guy who would go on Carson
Right.
and just the only thing that was really funny was how quick and like boom boom boom. I haven't seen, apparently he's like, I've seen him a little bit more recently. He's actually kind of funny. I watched some of his YouTube. He's different now.
Right.
But what
Right.
he was in the 80s, and it took him a while to fix that, was that it was just this quick like boom, I got the punchline, boom. It's just like everything's rhythm. It's rhythm
Yeah.
over jokes. And it's
Yeah.
so funny to think it's like a lot of people in the 70s broke that.
Yeah.
And then 80s almost went to a different rhythm,
Yeah.
and they stuck with that.
And there's a
so
lot of that
hard.
in this. Like,
Yeah.
there's
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot of times where it feels like we know so hard this is the end of this bit and it's
Yeah.
the punchline, and people are laughing at not a great joke
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
because they're just trained to.
Yeah.
And there's the
It's the Dennis
applause.
Miller.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the cue.
That's
a
the cue.
subliminal cue.
That is
Oh,
Wow.
that's our laugh break.
Yeah.
that is something that was very typical in the 80s, which was comics terrified that there be a silence.
Yes.
So they needed to roll that in, and like, if you ever hear like, I mean,
Conan
or,
still
yeah,
on his show every night. He'll make a joke and then say, "Which I thought
yeah.
was interesting,"
Right,
and
yeah,
then
yeah,
move
yeah.
on. And that's just the filler in case they don't.
Yeah. I mean,
it's very
certainly
self-conscious.
with Dennis, it was like it's like this over talking kind of thing, like, you know what I'm saying here, and it's
Yeah.
it's just like they're almost laughing at that more than they're laughing at the joke, right? Which
Yeah.
is like, it's very interesting. Which is what, like, I mean, he's so heavily parodied in a sense because it's so
Oh, yeah.
calculated. I mean,
Did you guys ever see one of my favorite bits with Miller and one of my favorite Dana Carvey bits was it was either the end of the season or the beginning of the season, and Dennis Miller had to do the news anchor oath, and so he
Okay.
said to swear me in is myself, Dennis Miller, and so
Yeah.
it was Dana
Dana
Carvey
Carvey
dressed
coming
just
in.
like him,
Yeah.
and he said, "I, Dennis Miller," and Dana says, "I, Captain Hairdo,"
Yeah.
and then he's going off on
That's
rants and
true.
doing all these great references and
you
stuff,
seen
and
the
it was
one where
perfect.
then Tom Hanks also does it too,
Yes.
and they
Yes.
sing Jingle
Yeah.
Bells together.
Oh,
Jingle Bells!
shaking their
It's
heads
so
and big
great.
hair
It's
and-
like,
yeah.
To
Yeah.
be able to take
Harvey.
that parody of you sitting right beside you
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
is pretty cool.
But
But-
it
yeah.
feels like he's sort of lost his sense of humor about himself over the years.
Well,
Like he used to be able to take it and roll with it, and it's just not there
Right.
anymore.
He is friends. Like, he did tour with Carvey and I think John Lovitz for a while.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Lovitz's stand-up. I imagine it's not good, but
I got a lot of love for Lovitz. He's got
Sure.
his attitude and swagger
he's
kills me.
hilarious, and again, one of
Yeah.
the best Saturday Night Live cast members of all time. I'll put him up in top 20
Right.
Sure.
for sure. But
I believe he is still doing his episode of Larry Sanders right now.
yeah, exactly.
blah, 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 blah.
But he Carvey says his stand-up is just him being like not politically correct the whole time, and I
Right.
just imagine it's him doing a bunch of bitterness,
Mhm.
which is his shtick. Is he's bitter about everybody else's success.
Right.
But how
they
much
did
of that?
tour
That's
together,
what I don't
so I guess
know.
they're still friends, and he
Yes.
still talks to. I mean, they're all pretty middle of the road. Neither of them
Sure.
Carvey describes himself as a radical moderate or whatever. Like
Right.
he's just like
Right.
very central, and Lovitz is a little like things he said about Obama were pretty terrible. Like
Mhm.
Yeah.
pretty, he's just right of center maybe.
Mhm.
So none of them are like
They're all that
Republicans.
soft, squishy libertarian middle ground.
Right.
A lot of the
thing.
people were like Sandler was pretty. Like he's like a Republican, Spade and those guys. Like
Mhm.
there was a weird era of Saturday Night Live where they were kind of right wing.
Yeah.
What happens when you do SNL? Like how do they turn this right wing factory on? Like I don't,
Yeah.
is it just all the sleep deprivation, all the drugs, and they just come out Republican? Is that what happens?
I think that's what happened in the '80s for sure.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
now, I mean, you got
Lauren
you know,
has a lot to answer for.
yeah,
right
that
now.
that period in there. But like now, it's you look at what's coming out of there, and it's John
It's-
Mulaney and stuff
Mhm.
like that.
Oh,
So
I mean, like,
it's
Oh, yeah.
it's swung the other
Yeah.
way
Right.
now.
these
Totally.
shows are like very left preachy and like,
Right.
and
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's negative or positive. It's just what it is, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
the news is now like Michael Che and Colin Joestar.
And
very
Yeah.
left.
you watch Seth Meyers, or as I like to call it, the news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I just go through, like, I'll maybe watch an interview that he does if it's someone that, but I'm always there for like the closer look and the check-in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only two things that I watch.
Yeah.
Because it's just him doing a desk piece, so it just reminds me of Weekend Update.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
really great
It is.
stuff. It's
I think, I mean, this is my opinion, but I think politics, they say Donald Trump was great for comedy. I think it's terrible because
Mhm.
I think Seth is really funny, but he's forced to kind of do the same
Yeah.
stuff over and
I
used
tell
to
you,
love
I didn't watch.
Closer
I didn't
Look.
like your show until
Really?
Trump.
Right.
I'm just
left.
tired of it.
It's
I'm
weird to
tired,
say.
I'm tired
But,
of Stephen Colbert talk about it over and over.
I don't
Yeah.
watch
Yeah.
Colbert. I liked him so much better as that character. he played.
Colbert, because I watched his show before and after the election.
Mm,
And before the election, he really hadn't found himself.
right.
And then when the election results were coming in, and you see him kind of drunk in front of the cameras with a tumbler of whiskey in
Oh,
his
yeah, I
hand,
remember
going,
this, yeah.
I don't know what the hell is happening right now. The next shows just went through, like he found
Yeah.
himself. It was
Mhm.
like when Leno had Hugh Grant on,
Yeah.
Right.
and that became the pivot
Became-
point.
yeah.
Like he found his moment where it's just
Right.
like, okay, now I know what I need to
Yeah.
do, and he's done
And it's
it.
truthful, right?
Right.
It's you're not trying to pretend to be. I still don't like his. I don't like Colbert's interview style. I feel like he's Fallon-esque. We have a lot of
Yeah.
talk show hosts now that are just such fans of the people
Right.
that the interviews are so slow pitch. I really miss Letterman in the role he was in as a talk show host. I'm not really a fan of his. My next guest needs no introduction because even he's falling into that a little
Right.
bit. Like I like my
Or
favorite
does
thing
he
with
play beer
Letterman.
pong with the Pope? Is that what he does?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, he's
but when
very
he used to interview
different.
people that we didn't know who they were,
Yeah.
that was awesome. Like,
Harvey Pete.
Well, that's like
Yeah.
Fallon's first show. I
Uh-huh.
like Jimmy Fallon when he did late night. When he did
Yes.
late night, he had like Charles Grodin on and like
Sure.
a bunch of people he
Yeah.
was genuinely fans of. And I love Jimmy when he's genuinely fans of someone, a fan of someone.
Yeah.
Now it's like NBC's puppet, right?
But Letterman would also like he had years running bit with the guy from the Hello Deli down the street,
Yeah,
Yeah,
and he
yeah.
would bring in like
Rupert G.
the staff, like the cue card guy became a celebrity, and
Yeah.
and he would and the stupid pet tricks, like it was people who weren't already celebrities
Yeah.
and found the interesting weirdness about
Right.
them. That's what I want. I don't want to see another recycled
yeah,
People
yeah.
magazine
I mean,
review.
Leno kind of changed that culture a lot.
Yeah, he
Because
did.
Carson used to have weirdos on too.
Oh yeah.
did.
But
Yeah.
and that was when it was a 90-minute show.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
like, okay, here comes a bird expert for 20 minutes to
Yeah.
to steer it back to Dennis Miller.
I'm glad someone is
One of
onto
the
this.
don't mean to take over. when
You've been doing
when,
it 40 years.
When he was, yes, exactly. I was just, back when podcasting was just opening your window and screaming out what you liked. My next guest is my neighbor. I remember seeing Dennis Miller on the old late night with David Letterman. And it was fun watching him. He came on, he didn't do stand-up, he did panel. And you could tell it was panel. Like at the point that I was getting into comedy and stuff like that, I at the age of like 16, 17, I figured out like, oh, they're just doing stand-up, but they're doing it in a chair. And it's like they're talking.
Yeah.
Icy.
Yeah.
And so he was doing panel, and he broke the illusion, because he was doing this stuff, and he was bringing in like this From Russia with Love reference to a flight he had taken.
Right.
He's like, the stewardess was having a bad time. She was about as courteous as that broad with the knife in a shoe from Russia with Love. It's like, more coffee, Mr. Bond? And then he just, after he gets through this like 3 minutes of doing airplane jokes, he just turns to Dave and goes, you know how nice it is to have a new airplane chunk? And they both start laughing because that's an inside joke to him.
Right.
But in that same episode, and it was also in part of that airplane chunk, I saw, to Dennis Miller's credit, he's going through his joke. You can tell he's just like, he's doing his act.
Right.
But he's doing it to David's face, like just across from him. And he's talking about the woman in the security. It's like, I'm watching the woman who's watching the security camera. The luggage goes through. She's got the attention span of Boo Radley, and I see and David.
Wow.
They cut back, and Letterman just goes hands up, goes,
Yeah.
no idea who that is. And Dennis Miller just turns to him, really? The shut-in from To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
And he goes on with the joke, and he's 3 words in, and Dave goes, oh yeah, like you can hear him like that, and it's like, it's just so.
Wow.
It's him, like it. That was a charming moment for me,
Sure.
because that's when I went, it's okay that we don't get this, because
Yeah.
that's a friend of his,
Right.
and he doesn't get it.
Well, and maybe he did, but he saved it knowing his audience did.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's Letterman was great at that. He was.
I mean, like,
wanted to keep it
he's
lowbrow.
such an interesting character, because I recently read a book on him, and he's changed so much. Like he
Letterman?
the book I read.
Dennis Miller as well.
The book I read about Letterman made me feel I liked him and hated him more at the same time, because he was kind of a jerk to a lot of his staffers and guests he didn't like. Whereas now he's trying this huge effort to be a lot nicer to people and stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas Dennis
Miller is not trying to be nice to anybody.
No.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that, because like in interviews since with either of those guys, Letterman has become very apologetic, and he wants to grow into it. He goes, I have made mistakes. I need to make resolutions around those mistakes. I am sorry for what I've done. I did this, and like he was just like very, very.
And I buy it.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Of course you do. And I don't mean that in the condescending. It's like, I mean you as a whole. It's like, of course you do, because that's the only choice we have, right? Like we have to take him at his word, and just this is what we want. But with Dennis Miller after 9/11, and just for him pulling that ship harder and harder to the right, to I think where he's painted himself kind of the same way that, and I hate to bring these two into the same camp, but Chuck Woolery has done the exact same thing,
right?
Where there's no turning back.
Yeah,
there's like he has now made this is my fan base now.
Yeah,
and like I refer in the same way. Like whenever I bring up Jay Leno when I talk about his old career, and when I talk about Dennis Miller, I always say Dennis Miller back when he was a comedian,
right,
would do that.
Who
like
is
Chuck Woolery? Well, Cha-Cha.
Dating Game, I guess.
Dating Game. Yeah, he was a talk show host.
Oh, okay.
Well, game show host. Really,
game show
yeah.
host. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
He never had a talk show. It was game shows that he
sort of disappeared for a while, but then came, I guess, to Twitter prevalence, or I don't know what it was that brought him back.
Chuck Woolery's on. This will be fun. Oh, good God.
It's like 90s or something, 2000.
Probably the late 90s or I don't know. He's a guy who's been around a while. He probably hosted a bunch of different shows.
Probably recognize him.
Probably something with big cards.
Yeah.
Probably Card Sharks or something.
Exactly.
But just listening to this album, it really amazes me at like how much of Bill Maher has ripped off Dennis Miller as
Right.
a whole. Like his entire shtick from cradle to grave seems to be, I'm going to be Dennis Miller, but slightly left, kind of racist. And
Well, I think
covert.
he's also a lot less funny. I
Yeah.
don't think.
Well, that's he's ripped it off. It's not genuine.
Right.
Yeah,
It's not
he
placed
just
with him
wants to
creating
talk about his opinions
it. Yeah.
and try to slip jokes in. He's not a joke smith.
But they would have been contemporaries at one point because
Sure.
Not that
because
much older.
Bill Maher was also doing, like, I remember seeing evenings at the Improv around the same time that Dennis Miller would have been doing stand up, and they would have both been touring. So there's no way they don't.
They probably both have one night stands. too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you're right. Like it's very interesting to see. But like if you look at Bill Maher's comedy back then, there were actual jokes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
He
he was
before
different.
he got the late show stuff, like back in the
Yeah.
brick wall era
Right.
in the 80s and early 90s, like I kind of found him funny because he wasn't doing all the stuff that
Yeah.
I later came to find, oh no, just I'm gonna just turn you off and never turn you back on
Right,
again.
right.
And I don't always disagree with Bill Maher. I mean, I often do.
Yeah.
But when I do, I still don't like him. Like
It's so
he-
weird.
he's just
I don't
such a
know a lot
jerk
of
how he
comedians
makes his
who like
points.
him. He's really disliked by a lot of comedians. Like a lot of people say the same thing. Like they'll watch the show because of the format, and like
Right.
I agree. Like sometimes some of those overtimes are really fun to watch just because he gets all these different opinions. But in terms of like his new rules and stuff, like it's so bad. Like it's just like, and a lot of comics don't like him. Like he's a butt of a lot of jokes, and it's like that must be such a weird feeling. Like
Yeah,
Some-
not to be
some of
respected
those-
by your community.
yeah.
Some of the things that I will watch, because I'll find the odd clip on YouTube that kind of floats into the feed and go, okay, let's see what this is about. And he can be right about a few things, and I will find some of them entertaining. But you're right, like the bulk of it, like maybe I'll see what this monologue is like. No,
Yeah.
and it's interesting, like they both kind of changed. Both Dennis Miller and Bill Maher changed, and it's interesting that we've turned against Bill Maher, whereas for the most part, I don't know where you guys stand on it. When I see what's happening with Dennis Miller, my initial reaction is, "Oh, Dennis,
Yeah.
like why? How did you let this?"
There's
happen?
a sadness to like
There
how I
is.
feel about it. It's like I kind of look at it as like the cultural inflection point of 9/11 broke a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think he's one of them.
But see, I still don't know how much of it is really him, because he was on Kimmel late last year, and he seemed really down to earth and kind.
Yeah, that was a great
and
interview.
It was a great interview, and they talked about his politics and how he says he doesn't consider himself political. I think he is that sort of fearful right side of center guy, but I don't think he's as hateful as he comes across
No,
in
he's
his
not.
comedy.
He's not-
I
he's
think
not a
it's to
hateful
incite
person.
people,
Yeah.
and we all used to laugh at it in a different way, and
sure.
now half of us do,
Well,
and half of
yes,
us
yes,
cringe.
Well, I think it's like my issues with Jerry Seinfeld's new material.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Jerry Seinfeld's new material isn't bad because of how it's bad because it's an 80s joke told in the 2000s
Well, we
and
talked about
2010s.
this
Yeah.
one on the last podcast.
Does he say the N-word?
No,
Okay.
but he uses
Seinfeld?
like is the gay stuff. He
Right.
leans into that a lot, and it's like it's not funny.
Well,
Yeah,
here-
it shows your
it-
age. You got to
here's-
change with the times.
Here's the thing. I think my mom actually mentioned this to me a long time ago, which is an interesting theory, which is it wasn't necessarily that Dennis Miller was scared by 9/11. He recognized that people were scared, like George Bush
Right.
recognized that people were living in fear and decided, oh, this is a market, right?
Yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
not a lot of right-wing comedians out there, and you can probably name
Yeah.
them on one hand. It's like Tim Allen and Larry the Cable Guy and Jeff Foxworthy. So it's like, oh, this is a market that a lot of people also feel this way about, the Middle East or whatever, and I can just start making jokes about it, and a lot of people will pay me for it.
Not just that, like where left and right are now has shifted.
Yeah.
I mean, if it was the same as it is right now, you could argue that we were all way more right wing
Sure.
in 1988.
Sure, and he just
you,
Right.
you heard
changed.
all the kids were using gay slurs as an insult. They
Mm-hmm.
weren't even really knowing what they were saying, and they would say racist things as well. Like we weren't as we got a long way to go, and I think we've slipped in the last week. But anyway, there's been some progress
Right.
in the last 30 years, and it's weird when a comedian who got famous at that time doing something, their audience demands they keep doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't, it's like they're in a bubble and can't really evolve with the rest of us, if that makes sense.
But you have to, and you have to grow at that time. Like,
And people do. I mean, don't get me wrong. A lot
And
of
I
comedians
think
do.
to a extent Seinfeld has. I mean, this
Yeah.
was our last.
To
I think
a
he has jokes
certain
that has.
extent.
Yeah.
The-
But I think Dennis Miller hasn't. I think he's locked into that structure
Yeah.
that he's
Well, he
established.
doubled down the other way because there's still half the population
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
on that side of things.
And
They'll
but-
come to a show.
But you've got, like, again, you need that awareness. You need to be in the room, and by the room, I need the world. Like,
Right.
I have been podcasting for 12 years. In that time, there are recordings and things on those recordings that today, and we're not even talking a long period of time, like
Yeah.
Friends era,
Yes.
which is also has not aged well.
That is a
in some
problematic
cases.
show.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff on my old podcast episodes are just, you would go, no, that's not cool. And do I do that now in the new episodes? Of course I do,
Right.
because making fun of gay people is fun.
Yeah. You are.
No, but like you grow and you learn, because if you don't service your audience.
Well, these days it seems like so many people, possibly because of the social platforms we have and finding other people like you, people are so committed to their opinions and not committed to an open mind and changing that mind. And that's a terrifying thing to me. And it's sad. And you also, through your podcast, are exposing yourself. Do
Oh, yeah.
something with that. Yeah, there you go.
Open robes every time you record.
But
Open
you're meeting people who have to keep it fresh all the time, who aren't celebrities. They're chasing new audiences, and you're meeting young comedians, and you're hearing their perspectives. And I think, and you have an open mind, so like you're constantly feeding yourself with new perspectives, I guess, which is great. And so we should all host a comedy podcast, is what I'm saying.
I'll give Todd a lot of credit because
Here we go.
I've seen Todd a handful of times, and like, absolutely, when you see someone, you're like, because Todd's an older guy, I'm like, oh, I'm surprised at how hip he is and smart he is, and he keeps in
You're
track.
not old, or you're young.
That's.
But
Let me tell you, there isn't a lot of room on that stage with me and those WKRP references that I start throwing out there. When I start talking about Sam and Diane's dalliances.
exactly. But there's guys that are younger than Todd who I feel like are older than Todd in the terms of the
Right.
fact that it's like
They're out of
I mean,
touch.
Right.
I will never say names, but it's like you see people only like maybe 30, 40, and it's like, gosh, like what, like how have you not evolved? You're starting comedy now,
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's like it's just things that you're tone deaf about. It's not even
Yeah.
like an opinion.
Well,
is
isn't
different. You're
it?
just
Don't you
tone
find it
deaf.
interesting? Like some of the people, there's so many different kinds of people who get into comedy, and some people who get into comedy. I mean, a lot of people are introverts, but I've met people who got into comedy who are very lone wolf type people, but they've watched a bunch of stuff from the 80s and then just try it, but they haven't lived.
Right.
They're like writing jokes that are derivative of 30-year-old
Yeah, yeah.
jokes
Yeah,
as
yeah,
opposed to their own experiences.
Yeah.
And it's sad to watch because
Yeah.
they want it to work, but they just don't understand how to do it.
Nothing drives me more nuts than when someone is up on stage giving me the performance of what they think the performance of a comedian is.
Yeah.
As opposed to just being themselves telling jokes. They put on this facade. You can just hear it in the tone of voice. You
Totally.
can hear it in the delivery. You can see how mechanical it is.
Mhm.
And it's just not like this. The Off-White album, if you put it in a time capsule, that sums up 88.
Yeah.
There was
absolutely.
every single thing about that made it 88. The Reagan era economics, the sort of arrogance that was built in around Reagan era economics of like, because you can hear the disdain in his voice. Not disdain, but like, in the jokes of like, if you're wearing a name tag, like he really kind of hits
There's
the blue collar.
pure
Yeah.
He
classism.
really hits
Yeah.
the flyover states and the red states. All the stuff about AIDS, all the stuff about
Yeah.
the Middle East, all the stuff about like the Russian stuff is still relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that summed up like everything that was happening at that
Yeah.
time.
And hearing you say that, it makes me realize, talking about the shift of left and right, we say, oh, we saw that he was on the right back then,
Right.
but then he was probably just left
Yeah.
of center,
Yeah.
Sure.
right? That stuff was stuff we were all thinking about, like, I imagine his biggest audience was in that year.
Yeah.
Like, we weren't as divided as we are now.
and
you
that
know?
was like coming right off of SNL. So he's at
Oh,
the
yeah,
top
he's
of
a
his,
rock star.
top of his
Of course.
like recognition
And
everything.
I mean, we talked a bit about how Saturday Night Live is a bit of a right wing factory. I mean, I wouldn't quite say that. I think the show is definitely seen and always has been as a leftist
Yeah.
show,
Right.
Yeah.
a liberal minded show.
Well, yeah, when he was
Progressive
on there, he was doing left wing material. But
Right.
as soon as he like that entire chunk of the cast during that era, all left and were all right, center right,
yeah.
Yeah.
kind of. So it was a weird confluence. But I think it's
Yeah.
the
The
Reagan
head writer
era.
was a right wing guy. Jim Downey
Yeah.
Yeah.
is a Republican.
Yeah.
But you still hear people say, "What happened to Dennis Miller?" And but the people who watched him on the show went and liked him, this left wing show, would go to his stand up and see more right stuff and still love it.
Yeah.
Because they loved his style. They loved his attitude. Well, they loved, they're starfuckers too. Everybody loves just seeing a celebrity. But yeah, it wasn't left and right weren't as far apart as they are now, I don't think. you know?
No, it was
before the Tea Party.
it was a very thin band that you were either pro Reagan or not sort of pro Reagan.
Yeah.
Like that was it. Like you heard like the statistics that he mentions there. When he went to bed, Mondale had 3. Like that was
Right.
the electoral. This is who we want for president. So everyone was like, we need we need change. We had just gone out of Jimmy Carter's presidency. We need a change, and he provided hope.
There were also,
and this dream. He put this dream in front of people. Like whenever you watch specials about the 80s, that's always what they talk about. It's like the Reagan
Right.
era was like, hey, you know what? It's literally like how Homer Simpson got to be the garbage commissioner for Springfield. Just like, let someone else do it.
Yeah.
Yay! And like literally that's how
A
he
lot of
got
people
it.
look back
Yeah.
though and go, "We could have used another Jimmy Carter."
Mhm. That's right.
Looking back, it's like
He's
oh,
still
yeah.
around building houses.
Yeah.
You know, so
He was too smart
Yeah.
for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think that was his issue. He
But
couldn't
it-
dumb himself down.
The interesting thing about the Reagans too is they really were the first presidential couple to weaponize pop culture. Like you had Nancy
Just Say
Reagan,
No.
just so you know, Nancy Reagan showing up on Punky Brewster, I think it was. So you had like video games with
Were
their
they
faces
both
on it.
actors, Nancy and?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Nancy was too.
Nancy was.
was.
Yeah, not as big name
No.
as Ronnie, but like then they got married. She sort of retired to raise the
Right.
kids.
Yeah.
But yeah, like they were both on TV and places that you traditionally never saw.
And young
presidency.
too, right? Like since like JFK, youngest since like JFK.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
but
was like
still, like after
50s,
the
right?
Obamas, it's pretty
Right.
Well,
old.
and back then too,
So-
like we could agree that we would have some values that were shared.
Mm-hmm.
And there would be a lot of overlap, and there would be
Right.
maybe a couple of little things where you'd be like, I like his stance on this, but not on this.
Mm-hmm.
But these days, it's we can have nothing in common,
Right.
and we have to find the most controversial issue that will mobilize people.
Right.
And so we're being manipulated, and it can't be genuine because there's no way half of us have a completely opposite set of values than the other half.
It's the thing of
crazy.
like once we throw labels in. I mean,
Yeah.
Obama used to say this a lot too. It's like when people take the labels away and you just go sit beside someone who's just a regular folk and you start talking to them, and a lot of people have the same values, right? Like when you take away the labels, it's just we're all human beings who want people to succeed and they want everyone to have an opportunity at life, and
That's a lovely
kids to
thought,
be
but I don't
healthy.
agree with it anymore.
Listen to this beta cuck libtard.
Exactly. Exactly.
Jesus.
Get me
Right?
out of here.
Clear the goddamn room.
It's like we put labels, and it's unfortunate. And then people who don't have access to education hear one thing, and they nod their head, and they say, "I need money, so I'll vote for you." And we live in a social media era where people hear what they want to hear, and they don't get all the information that they should get, and it's frustrating. And
And there's no accountability
people don't
anymore. That's what
vote,
really bothers me the most. There's no apologies. There's no, oh, maybe I was wrong about that. Or maybe my party leader was wrong
Yeah.
about that. Like that kind of tribalism scares the hell
well,
out of
I
me.
mean, like, again, this is throwing shade at the other side, but there's currently someone in power who would never apologize for anything.
Yeah.
And
Right.
even admit to
There's
anything in
two
terms of
people
wrongdoing.
that would never apologize.
Yeah, yeah.
there's
Yeah.
one on this side of the border, the other on the other side.
But what's also
Yeah.
interesting is if, and I don't want to get too much into left versus right and who's bad and who's good or whatever, but Trudeau will apologize if he makes a mistake, or he has, and sure, there's things he needs to apologize for and hasn't. Please don't send letters. But
We're not a pro Trudeau show. We're
What's
just
funny
funny
to me is that some people who are his opponents say for whatever, they're a Scheer fan.
Trudeau says sorry more than the guy stuck in the shelves at Milton Bradley.
Right. So Scheer doesn't apologize because he hasn't said anything wrong, and he shouldn't apologize. But of course he would if he did. Trudeau says, "I'm sorry." What a wuss.
Yeah.
What a weakling. Just apologize and what a crybaby. Like, when is being accountable
Right.
equated to being
absolutely.
a baby? I mean, that
again,
takes
this
more
is
guts.
the social
Right.
media thing. It's like,
Yeah.
once you start hating on Trudeau, everything you see on your social media feed is
Yes.
the negative things he
Exactly.
does, and not to say he doesn't do negative things.
Of course.
But all you see is that, and if you are hating on Doug Ford, all you see is the
Yes.
hate on Doug
It is.
Ford.
It is the exact equivalent of I buy a bird bath on Amazon, and then suddenly my feed for the next 3 weeks is, "Do you need a bird bath? Not anymore,
I have
dickhead."
one. Yeah, exactly.
Don't you hate
Exactly.
squirrels?
Yeah.
Squirrel killer.
Yeah. There was something
like
interesting,
birds.
and I heard it again tonight, and I forgot about this. There's actually a joke on this special that shows up on another guy's album.
Ooh.
It's the
Oh.
exact same joke.
Juicy,
Really?
juicy.
Yes.
What's the other comedian?
I'll tell you the joke, and we'll see if anyone else has found this in this room,
Okay.
since this is a comedy album podcast.
Sure, yeah.
Is the joke about Reagan's age, and he says, "My grandfather's younger than him, and we won't let him have the control for the
Right.
TV."
That sounded like a very 80s joke
It is a very 80s joke.
and an easy one. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know who
would
did it first, but I can tell you it showed up on this album first.
Okay.
And then, now, again, I haven't checked the year on this, but Billy Connolly's Live at Albert Hall has that exact same word-for-word joke, except he uses telly. Scott.
Sure.
And, and so that's the...
It's both Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would be surprised if either of those men ripped off the other one.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound
Like,
No.
it's general enough. It could just be sort of like concurrent
it's a zeitgeist
ideation
thing.
kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it would be
Yeah.
weirder if Billy Connolly was doing something like, and then the Gabor sisters.
That's
Cha
right.
cha.
We'd be like, well, I don't know there, Billy. Like, see the
Hey,
little...
what's with the kabuki shit twilight?
That's good.
Exactly.
Oh.
Well, this feels like a good time to take a little bit of a break. We'll go maybe refresh ourselves and think of some more things we want to talk about. We'll be right back to finish things off.
Yes, it is. That's right.
It's literally, there's no joke. There's no joke in it.
Wait, so
It's-
we just had to do a mic adjust. Did you just come in on that last
yeah,
word?
yeah, I hope
Blah,
so.
blah,
Just
blah,
came
blah,
out.
F word.
Yeah.
And the whole joke is, you know when you're riding with your buddies and you just see one walking down the street and you just yell out the window at them?
Yeah.
And the audience goes nuts. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no joke. It's
No.
not even like sometimes in Delirious, he just uses it as a word.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's still not okay.
No.
But the joke's not about them being gay. It's just he uses that word.
Right.
But this
Yeah. Raw. is-
one, and Callum and I were just sitting there going, "Oh my god!" Because Callum's got all these random albums. We were just listening to my friend Callum O'Neill.
Right.
And we were just in shock, and it was like, "There's no bit," and the audience is loving it. They're
Yes.
cheering, they're hooting and hollering. This is blatant, just homophobia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
disgusting.
Yeah, it's weird, and it makes me wonder. Like, since he has done nothing stand-up wise since,
Yeah.
Yeah.
where's his head at now? Like,
Yeah.
can he even do it? I mean, he got a long way just on his charm, right? I mean, he's just an amazing energy to watch.
I can't wait to watch it. The new Comedians in Cars comes out today, and
Oh,
he talks
yeah.
a lot about going back into stand-up on the thing, because I
Oh,
saw the
cool.
snippet, and he's like, "I've been really wanting to do it."
Mm-hmm.
Like Don Rickles kept telling me to do it and stuff, and
Wow.
I love that you're on the fence until Don pats you on the shoulder and goes, "You gotta carry the torch, kid."
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so let's wrap things up on Dennis Miller here. So, how do we usually close this show, Matt? It's been a while.
Well, we'll go around, see, if you think it's an important album, and if you'd recommend watching it, and any closing thoughts. Then we go around closing thoughts on
There
it.
you go. All right, let's start with you, Todd.
I feel it's an important album. This is one that I had a collection of albums that if I was on a long drive, I would put them in the tape deck. If I wanted to go to sleep, I would put them on so that I knew how long it took me to fall asleep. And I heard this. Oh, the last bit I heard was, Twyla. Okay, good night. So that's how long it took me to sleep. I remember listening to this album the first time, and as soon as it was done, I went, "Damn, I need a thesaurus." And
Did you listen to it in '88?
Yeah, I did.
You did.
Yeah, I did. I listened to it in '88. I had just started university then, and it filled a lot of kilometers on the highway between Gananoque and Waterloo.
How many times have you heard it? You think?
Oh, I can't imagine how many times.
Yeah.
There was in this collection of albums. There was this one. There was "Playing with Your Head" by George Carlin.
Nice.
There was "Women of the Night," which was Kathy Smith, Kathy
Oh
Ladman,
wow.
and Paula. Who was the other one? Margaret Smith was on that
Okay.
one. And it just kind of fit in there. Like it was so different than anything that was out there. It was of the time.
And you
But
still
it-
laugh at it.
I still do.
Yeah.
I still do.
That's cool.
Mostly the racist parts because now I agree with
Yeah,
them.
that's you.
But it just took me right back to that childhood. Like I said before, this is
Right.
a time capsule for 80s.
And that's an interesting thing too, right? Like someone coming in cold to this album would have a much different feeling, I imagine. So you, Chili, when did you first hear this album? Was
Last
it today?
week.
Last
Right.
week.
I
and
listened to it in preparation.
and was there? I imagine your eyebrows were raised for a lot of the.
a lot of it? I mean, the thing is, as I say, I know pretty much the post 9/11 Dennis Miller.
Right.
So I know this guy, and it's my favorite thing to do because whenever I see an older comedian or something, I say, "Which Dennis Miller are we talking about?" And they're
Right.
all obviously impressed by my knowledge.
It's like when you're talking about Def Leppard with friends, one arm or two.
It's certainly important. It's an important album because, as Todd said, it's literally 1988,
Mhm.
and it's
I mean, it's not the only
quintessential-
comedy album from that era. But
No. but it might as well be called 1988.
Yes.
Yeah. Take that, Van Halen, 4 years later.
Exactly. And it's certainly quintessential Dennis Miller. And as I say, there's a few genuinely great bits in there. There's
Yeah.
a few that you don't need to know the references. You don't need to know anything. It's a lot of it's difficult for me to get on board on. And as
Sure.
I say, I'm pretty old. I have a pretty old soul. I watch a lot of older stuff. But it's still tough, and it still goes over my head. And it's like, obviously, like, if you don't live, like, I love old SNL, but it's hard for me to watch Update up until about Norm Macdonald because it's like, I mean, Chevy Chase was my hero growing up, but I can't watch a lot of Update because it just doesn't play for me.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of his was also just visual jokes. He would just make fun of what was in the
Sure.
picture. So, but it's a weird thing, and everyone from Dennis Miller's cast or something, like, I think that's the best. I don't think there's such thing as a golden era on SNL, but if you want to come close, it's Carvey, Hartman,
Yeah.
like Dennis Miller,
Myers.
Victoria Jackson.
Victoria Jackson,
Yeah.
Jan Hooks, who was one of the
Oh,
best
Jan
ever.
Hooks was
Yeah.
absolutely
And then
incredible.
Mike Myers found his way
Sure.
in there and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I enjoyed some of it, but it doesn't quite hold up, and I think if you played it for a lot of young comedians today who don't have what I have, which is, I think, an appreciation for that era, and not to say that's a bad thing or anything, it's just who I grew up on because of my parents. But it's important. It has funny jokes, but it doesn't quite hold up to today's standards.
Interesting. Yeah, it's what I find interesting about it is I don't feel. I mean, none of it's really directed at me, but I don't find it as offensive as some of the stuff that Murphy did.
No, of
because
course not.
because I feel like there's something about this persona that Miller uses that lets him get away with a lot of stuff. And it's just kind of this angry, ranty guy. And it's kind of the excuse of, you know, Archie Bunker, like, I hate everybody equally type of thing. You know what I mean? It's sort of that thing. Like, this guy's just angry at this moment in time, this specific thing. Some of the stuff we wince at, but then he moves on to something that makes us chuckle. It's not like it's 90 minutes about I hate people
And he
with
takes
turbans
shots at
and
different
stuff.
people
Yeah.
and stuff
He
like
does,
that.
yeah. So it seems a little equal, even though you can kind of hear the, you shouldn't have said
But
that
to
type
me,
of stuff.
the holding up is not the offensive part; it's the reference part.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's the-
Well, references will work
Right.
forever.
Yeah.
By definition. I mean, if you know what he's talking about, you'll always know.
Yeah.
I
The
guess.
It
problem
does
with
need
his-
a glossary.
Yeah, the problem is
Yes.
like so many of his references are so hyper specific and
Yeah.
culturally specific to 1960s television.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Yes.
like
Yeah.
F Troop. You know?
Yeah.
Like,
You
Right.
had to be
Yeah.
exactly his age
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
know that stuff. Right?
Yeah.
That's really smart of him too, because I don't know who the ultimate Dennis Miller fan is, but I think the people who go to his shows, they get most of his stuff and they're on board with him, and that's a smart comedian. I mean, you can't be someone for everyone. I think he's probably, his audience has diminished as time goes by, but they've probably got more they've gotten more passionate about
Yeah.
being a fan of his, you know. He speaks to them specifically, as opposed to Seinfeld, who's sort of all over the map, you know.
He's ranty, but he's not like Lewis Black now ranty.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where it's just like, take that, paper clips. Like, it's
Yeah.
just yeah.
Yeah, he's got this sort of effortless, I mean, I'm sure he puts a lot of effort into it, to being that cool, to being
Yes.
to shrugging it off.
Yeah.
Like it's such a casual hate that
Yeah.
it's non-threatening.
There's that part in the special where he almost does the voice, the impression of Clark Gable, and then he goes, "Nah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna circle back to being
Cary Grant.
cool."
Yeah.
Sorry,
back
Cary
to
Grant.
Coolsville.
And it's like he's both a little bit making fun of himself, but also that's genuinely who he is, and
Right.
he
Yeah.
would do a bit with voices and characters.
That joke was my introduction to sort of like the meta comedy, which
Yeah.
was comedy making fun of itself.
Right.
And so for
without
him
getting too
to-
high and inside.
With him to do that, you're like,
Yeah.
you're 3/4 way through. Is he gonna do this?
That I think was
Yeah.
my favorite
Yeah.
joke in the entire album, because he's making fun of the comedy of the day. He's making fun of his persona and the entire artifice about
Yeah.
both of them.
Right,
So
exactly.
and, like, he's taking the entire structure down.
Yeah.
I guess I feel like we're giving him a little bit too much credit.
Would you want more airplane chunks?
I mean, maybe not a lot of people did it, but pretending to do a bad bit and then saying, I'm not going to do it, I don't think is the smartest thing Dennis Miller's ever done.
Yeah.
Keep in mind around that time, and if you go onto Amazon Prime right now and look at the old Evening of the Improvs that are out there.
Right, with the brick wall.
That
and-
I have said this before. Some of those bottles of wine have turned to vinegar. It is not good.
Yeah.
And a lot of it would be comedy like that. Like,
Right.
what if Ronald Reagan was actually Donald Duck Reagan, and then it would just
Yeah.
like whatever
Sure.
it was.
And
Like,
that,
it was just horrible.
that
comedy.
was my bread and butter in high school.
Of course it
is watching that stuff.
Yeah.
And
Right.
and that's and I think, like, for me, it's that time capsule element of that album.
Okay, so fair.
Yeah.
So in '88, maybe that was, oh man, finally someone who's not doing everything everyone's doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Because now it's so passe to even make the joke about that.
Right.
That itself has become a
Right.
cliche.
Yeah.
It now you need to commit to do the thing
You have to
need
actually
do.
do it.
That's
now.
right.
Yeah. Wow.
We've come around so full circle that we hate what we're doing.
Yeah. Who would you say is? I mean, he's still around, kind of doing the same thing. Is there an equivalent to Dennis Miller these days who maybe isn't as inflammatory, or
When
a
you said
Patton
Patton,
Oswalt? That's a really
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, I never.
Patton is sort of the same thing. He will talk politically. He has an awful lot, and he's another one of my favorites. And for the exact same reason, when I sit there, I go, "Fuck, I need a thesaurus," because he's also a very smart writer, very conscious of his word. He will, in the same vein, throw out references that, hey, if you get them, cool. If not, you'll figure it out in a couple of years when you finally watch, Deadwood or something,
Right.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
So it's like I find that he has a really, really smart word choice in the same way Dennis Miller
I respect any comedian who is willing to be niche.
does.
It's gutsy to say, I'm only for certain people. I'm not for everybody. Because I think a lot of comedians go out there trying to be, you know, and every comedian try to appeal to everybody. What's funny to everybody? And it's just not possible.
Yeah.
No.
Who would be the closest?
Well,
who's
we
appealed?
said the Bill Maher. We said
But who would be the closest
mean-
to someone who's appealed to everybody?
to appeals to everyone.
I mean, Seinfeld is a rock star for sure.
I mean, a lot
Bob
of the late
Hope.
night guys, obviously, like
Let's
Jimmy
go.
Fallon and Seth Meyers and stuff like
Let's
that.
go with the guy that threw him off a Star Search, Sinbad.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he had a moment.
He's the Sinbad of our
Those are your
generation.
kind of biggest ones. That any late night person right now
Mhm.
is pretty much, you know, with all due respect to all of them, they're
Sure.
pretty pandery, you know, and they
Yeah.
try to please everyone, and they try to be like, they don't try to step on too many toes, right?
Right.
Samantha Bee kind of breaks that.
Sure,
Yeah.
but I don't
Yeah,
think,
yeah.
like, even though it is a late night show,
Right.
it's very
Right.
different. It's
It
more
is.
of a it's like a Daily Show type thing, which I
Right.
never really consider the Daily Show as a regular late night.
John Oliver in the same vein.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
John
would say
Oliver could be like, I could see that as a Dennis Miller type
Yeah.
for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
to
yeah.
add a Canadian thread to it, I kind of see Rick Mercer in the same vein with the
Yeah.
rant kind of
Yep.
stuff.
Well, it's the
Just
Ron
a-
James too, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
just
he's so good at what he does. I mean,
Yeah.
he's not for everybody, and he's probably for an older audience because of what he talks
But
about.
that's
And
why he's so much
but
like
he-
Dennis Miller.
I cannot believe what he can memorize and rhyme
Yeah.
off with the rhythm he does. Like,
He came on the
is
podcast and
incredible.
we just slip into a bit.
Sure.
I go, you have this reference, goes, oh, and then he rattles
Well, I
through
mean,
like 2 minutes of
I've
it.
heard
You go,
him
poetry.
on like Chris
Yeah.
Locke's podcast, and he just like goes and goes and goes and goes, and he's just brilliant, right?
Yeah.
He's just so smart. It's like, find him funny or not, he's brilliant. I mean, that's just like Dennis Miller. Find him funny or not, brilliant guy.
And I
Brilliant.
got to do some voices on Ron James's show a couple years ago, some of the animated stuff, and man, he is a driven, hardworking dude too. I mean, that's apparent from his stand-up, but he has a vision and he works hard, and it was really cool to see his commitment to that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
What were you gonna say about Rick Mercer?
just like he's got that sort of hyperkinetic pace
Yeah.
to his
Mhm.
ranting where it just again go 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 go
Yeah.
and he doesn't give you a chance to breathe with his when he does that. But that's like one specific
A little
bit that
old
he does.
Rick Mercer too.
Yeah.
Rick Mercer's become more pandery, and like his show in the later years was Let's Please Everyone, whereas
Right.
his stuff like on whatever 22 minutes, right? And
Yeah.
then his like.
Well, when you're on a public broadcaster, I guess you have to
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you
try
can't.
to.
Canadian
coast to coast.
satire, as they say, is
Yeah.
pretty toothless because the things you can and can't say in Canada.
But that's
very
supposed to be
different.
changing, and they're starting to push the limits of those laws.
Wouldn't
They've
that be fun?
changed.
Wouldn't that be
I'm
fun?
hoping the Beaverton goes a little sharper
Yeah, it
this
seems
year.
Third
you know.
season.
We're
Yeah,
looking at it.
yeah.
Third season.
See,
Going to see
TV.
them tape on Monday. I'm looking
Oh, yeah?
forward to that. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Right on. All right, folks. Well, thanks for listening to this album with us and for listening to the show. Todd Van Allen, host, of course, of Comedy Above the Pub,
You got it.
which I've been on twice, I believe.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. So it's a good time. Have you had Patton Oswalt on the show?
No.
Oh, we have.
No.
Well, anyway.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
Son of a bitch.
yeah, we did. We got an interview with him when he was publishing his book last year. That was pretty cool.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's you can find it on the
His
thing.
podcast interview. He's such a smart guy.
He's a great
Mhm.
dude,
Ah,
really nice
I love
dude.
Pat.
And Chili, we can see your show every
Yeah.
month at SoCap.
First Tuesday of the month, 9:30 p.m.
Beautiful.
Pay
Comedy
what
bar.
you can't.
Comedy bar.
Pay what you
Comedy
can't
bar.
at
Comedy bar. Sorry,
Yeah,
and it's what do you have? Four or five comics?
yeah. We have about 4 or 5 stand-ups, usually a sketch or improv, and then a
Oh, cool.
professional headliner.
Cool. Do you MC it or open it? Or?
Oftentimes, sometimes I do sketch on it, but
Cool.
oftentimes me or my producing partner Robbie Woods will host it, and we're doing a best of show on August 6th. I don't know when this
Awesome.
comes out.
Sounds good.
And it'll be some of my favorite people coming back. So
Right on.
Excellent.
Do we know what our next album is going to be?
Not yet.
All right,
No.
then we'll
If I could just
cut
throw
this part
one,
out.
if I could throw one more thing out there,
Yeah.
third Saturday of the month, also at Comedy Bar, is my Write 'em Up show.
Of course, yeah.
The next one at the time of recording is tomorrow. Don't know how fast this is coming out.
Nope.
It's the third Saturday of every month. So August
Great.
17th is the next one. 5 comics come on stage. I host it. They do time. They leave. While they're on stage, I have a team of writers writing roast jokes about everything the comic does. I dismiss the comic. and I retrieve those cards and I read them verbatim, providing anonymity and emotional distance for the writers.
It is very fun.
It's the funnest show in TO, so please call on.
And of course, you can find Matt and me here at Comedy Album Book Club.
Yeah.
We're on Twitter at ACABC Podcast.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
No. At CABC podcast. Yeah.
Listen to the,
Google. Sworn
listen to
that's
the
what
Seinfeld episode. It's a good one. We get very off track.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. Thanks again for listening to Comedy Album Book Club.